Right, now this here is the cheapest Ryzen CPU you can buy. And I've been following these for a little while, and I managed to snag one in an auction for just £5. Now this is meant to be one of the entry-level 4-core Ryzen processors. To be fair, at this point, I'm not sure if I actually have just ordered a box, because this cost me around £5 to actually order. Because whatever people are listing these as the starting price is what they're going for. There is no demand for these. So I figured, well, it's weird that we're now seeing real Ryzen in bargain bin territory. It almost seems too soon. But why don't we get this open and just see what we've got? Well, there's a box. It's actually not too badly packaged. Oh, this feels very strange. This is the worst thing. It's not even just a processor by itself. It's an in-box Ryzen 3 1200. Now, I can't remember a great deal about the Ryzen 3 1200. Off the top of my head, they were sort of the entry-level Ryzen processors. Look, there is one in there. It's actually got the Ryzen 3 in there for a £5. An in-box Ryzen processor. Has it got the cooler? I'm actually a little bit curious now. But yeah, on top, 3.1 GHz base, 3.4 GHz precision boost. They do overclock a little bit, but once again, it's Zen 1. So they don't overclock particularly well. What have we actually got inside? We've got the instructions. Processor tucked down the side with the sticker. This is how worthless these are. In box, I'm assuming complete with the sticker, no bent pins either, and look at that, we even get, I've got no use for this, but it's been so long since I've seen these. Is this the tiny little, yeah, it's the tiny little baby Ryzen cooler. Oh wow, that has not been used. I've just put my finger in thermal paste. These are so unsought after. This is new, because I've just put my finger in the thermal paste, which I wasn't expecting there to still be the original factory thermal paste on a Ryzen 3. I'm guessing they used the processor and then maybe used it for updating a BIOS and then just got rid on eBay. Let's pop that back in there. Now, conveniently, as everyone probably knows at this point, my actual test system is AM4. So this is going to be the easiest thing to set up in the world because I just have to put it in my actual computer. While we get this installed, I am going to give a couple of early thoughts because, I mean, let's be honest, AM4 is so cheap these days. The only reason to buy one of these is to use it so you can upgrade later, so you can build the whole computer. And I want to find out if this is good enough to get you by, because if you can just buy one of these, build an AM4 setup, and then you can upgrade later to something like what I've got, a 3700X or one of the X3D chips, for a £5, can you really go wrong? At the same time, could it be worth just not buying these? Is it worth, if you're on this end of the market, just buying maybe just a Sandy Bridge Core i5 or a Haswell Core i5, because I suppose being a 4-core chip, those are its main competitors. I don't think I've taken this processor out of this PC since it went in. Oh, that fell. Maybe don't do that vertically, is that okay? All is well, all is well. Don't do this vertically, don't do what I'm doing. I'm putting that in this container to keep that safe because I don't want to buy another Ryzen 7. Our Ryzen 3, it does look like it's hardly been used. Right, that is our Ryzen 3 in. It looks the part. I've never dealt with a Ryzen 3. I mean, just the novelty of a £5 Ryzen processor, it by itself is interesting because I want to see what it can do. Maybe it's actually going to be pretty decent. I suppose the big question now is, does the cheapest Ryzen processor in the world actually work? Now, I'm just running a standard B350 setup that I've been running since Ryzen came out, to be honest. So why don't we plug in a monitor? GT210, you were the first thing on hand. Right, shall we give this a quick test then? We've got our Ryzen 3. Does it work? I want to say yes, they are a very basic processor, and when did these come out? Once I can look at the box. 2017. Okay, so modern by this channel standards, but this is still a nearly 10-year-old processor, which is probably why they are so cheap. I'd imagine it was taken a second because, let's be honest, it's going to have to tell us processor has been updated. New CPU installed. That's a downgrade and a half. Ryzen 3 1200 at 3100 MHz. Well, why don't we pair this with an actual graphics card, because there's no point testing it today with a GT210 because that'd be stupid. Of course, we are going to be using my mate's 6700 XT because, well, it's about the most powerful card I have on hand. Apart from that one guy in the comments that gets really angry about this card. Says it's not powerful enough. My guy, I'm testing a £5 Ryzen I bought off eBay. It's more than good enough. Right, well, we'll let that boot up. My plans for testing today is we are going to take this seriously. I know a lot of people would laugh at it and go, oh, this is just a cheap Ryzen processor. Just buy a R5 1600. Well, really, let's be honest, I'd say buy a 3700X. These seem to be amazing value right now. But I'm thinking, for a lot of people out there all over the world, what if you're trying to scrimp and save together to put together an AM4 system, and you just need a processor. You've got everything else, but you just don't have a processor to get using it with. Is this going to be enough to get you by for a $5? You can use it to update your BIOS, you can overclock it to hopefully get some extra performance, and I'd imagine it'll run Linux pretty good as well, because we will do some Linux testing. But first thing I want to do is get a baseline score and a couple of tests, then I want to try and tweak it around and see what extra performance we can get out of it, see how it benefits from maybe speedier RAM, maybe an overclock, maybe I just want to run a modern game on it, because, I mean, it's booted to the desktop quick enough, but then again, it kind of should, shouldn't it? I mean, I was one of the early adopters of Ryzen. I mean, I bought it pretty much as soon as it came out, and it was a game changer. But I don't remember too much of the 4 cores, other than the later 4 cores that came with XFR2, and because of course all games were using 4 cores at the time, they'd boost up as high as you needed them, and got excellent performance. These early ones, I don't know where to put the box. It's in the way no matter where I put it. We've got the Ryzen 3 1200, Summit Ridge, 14nm. It's not set up at all, so it's running with rather slow DDR4 speeds. You get no built-in graphics. What does it boost up to? Should we see if it's boosting correctly? So it's running at 2.8. If we stress it real quick, 3.1. So much for your 3.4 GHz precision boost technology. Well, it's better than a Core 2 Duo. How about that? That's about the one thing it's got going for it out of the box. Anyway, let's run this through a quick physics test, make sure it's not dying, and then we'll go from there and just actually get some benchmarks together. So one of the first things I want to do is just see what the stock performance is. Now, we are running dual channel, which should help. Were these 1 CCX? I believe they were. So I think that is one of the things it had going for it, is it was at least one single CCX. So you didn't have to worry about memory speed as much as you did with the others, because it'll make a difference, but not as much as the earlier Zen 1 chips off the top of my head. I will double check that later, but I believe that is right. Out of the box, that's not too bad. Okay, yep. Once it starts getting more intensive, our little £5 Ryzen is struggling, but it's powering through. It's doing it for a $5. I can't really argue it. It's pretty decent levels of performance. 2653. Well, with this cooler, it didn't really get hot. Peaks of 46 degrees. This takes a while to do, but is really good for finding out single core performance and bits and pieces like that. So when we do overclock it, at least we can gauge some of the increase. I mean, the score we got last time is around a Sandy Bridge i5. That's the thing with original Zen, is they were okay. I mean, it was a new option you could buy. At the same time, Intel was giving you 2 cores for the money, AMD gave you 4. Zen 1 was good, but as an early adopter, well, it certainly had its teething issues in places, and of course with processors like this they were definitely of their era. But we'll see what it does, and you know, one of the big points was you couldn't tune an i3. I can hear the processor thinking. We're still going. This test takes a little while even on good processors. Is it done? Do we get a score? What are we up to? This has taken 7 minutes. Shows that it's got pretty good scaling, 435 on a single core, all the way up to the 4-thread test of 1604. After this, it can't really do anything because we only have the 4 cores. What we should probably do now is take a little look in the BIOS and see just what tweaking options you get on a processor like this. Right, so first thing I'm going to try and do is make sure the RAM can be stable at 3 GHz. This is not always the easiest on 1st gen Ryzen, but I'm sure it'll provide some degree of uplift. So if we just set it to XMP at 3 GHz, doesn't look like a huge increase in performance from CPU-Z, but I'll run 3D Mark real quick, I'll get a result. If it's stable, then what we'll do is we will do some overclocking. Going from 2000 MHz up to 3000 gained us 100 points. Now it has been a few years since I tried to get extra performance out of 1st gen Ryzen. So we'll try and do 3.8 GHz, that'll be a nice overclock. 3.5 volt. We'll see if it's stable at that. So that should take us from 3.1 to 3.8 GHz. You may be able to get more out of these, but I don't know how good this chip is. I mean, for a $5, it looks brand new. But I don't really want to cook it because I don't really care if I cook it, to be honest. I need it to be stable enough to get a video out of it. And there's no point doing a video on something that could actually be useful to someone if I'm saying, well, just run it at 4 GHz and burn the thing. We could. Wouldn't be very entertaining though, would it? Well, it would be, it just wouldn't be very useful. Stress the processor, let's see what it does. Does it maintain a stable 3.8 GHz? change your RAM speed, change your core ratios, you get about as much as you can out of a £5 Ryzen. We'll run this through, get a couple more results, and I want to try running a modern game. I want to try doing something modern on here. Seems like a fun idea. Can a £5 processor actually do modern gaming? That's the part that's getting to me most. I mean, actual tweaking time? This isn't like the old AMD Phenoms and AMD FX chips where you're messing about with things for ages. It purely is a bit of memory speed, bit of extra voltage, and a bump to the clock speed. It's about the best you can do with a £5 processor, to be honest. And honestly, it's running cool enough that I think you could get away with it on the stock processor you get in the box, because so many of these for sale are just in the box, more or less brand new. Someone bought one that had genuinely, it still had the seal on it. They got it for £7 on eBay, because I was looking over the completed listings. Nobody wants these. Genuinely no one. But as it stands at the moment, that's not a terrible score. It's not great. It's not great by any stretch of the imagination, but for a £5, genuinely not bad. I mean, at least you're on a modern platform. That's kind of the main thing it's got going for it, which has advantages and disadvantages. On the one side, you can actually upgrade from here. On the negative side, you're spending all the money to get into a modernish platform, but then limiting yourself with the processor. As I said, the reason to buy this, at least off the top of my head, is to upgrade from it later. This is still going to take 10 minutes to complete, so I'm going to walk away and do something. I got things I can do while this runs. Peaks out at 70 degrees. Apparently hits 90. I don't believe this result because it's just this one weird spike where apparently we were then running at 5.4 gigahertz. This did not run at 5.4 gigahertz, I can assure you. But there we go. It has survived. It is overclocked. It's running the correct memory. Can it run a game? This is the most important question. I do actually have a new game out. One that seems to have the most broken CPU utilization of all time. So we'll see if it can run Samson. Why not? I don't know if it's going to launch. I'll try again. We'll see if we actually get in-game this time. It's working at the moment. I am just going to bring up the Radeon overlay. Bring up the Steam overlay instead then. We're running the intro cutscene at 60 FPS and are already at 100% utilization. Oh yes, the little Ryzen is definitely designed for the world of Unreal Engine 5. Oh, we are actually in-game. Okay, it's hitting around 40-ish FPS. Now we have to do a bit of the storyline. To be fair, it is a pretty good looking game when it's actually running at proper settings and not the absolute lowest. We are getting just about 30 FPS on a £5 processor, which I wasn't really expecting. I mean, I have got the game set down to some pretty abysmal settings, but yeah, it's pegged at 100% utilization. We're definitely going to have to benchmark this properly and set it up to do something. I'll take 30 FPS in this game because that's about what I've seen it do on most systems. And he died. Because this game is it's fun, but it's very stupid. Our little £5 Ryzen, we've got it overclocked, we set up the memory, we've got it running modern games. All that's really left to do is get around to testing this properly. So why don't we actually find out what this processor is, where it came from, just what the specs are, and then see what we can actually do with it. So just what was a Ryzen 3 1200? Well, it's always been a cheap processor, and that's likely one of the reasons it's one of the first Zen chips from AMD to enter this bargain bin territory. See, it launched in sort of July of 2017, and it was meant to be the entry level. This is as low as you were meant to go if you were trying to get into AM4 as a platform, without buying some of the weird Athlons and the AMD A-series chips, which were just older architectures bought to AM4, which are interesting in their own right, but this absolutely destroys them. So it was sort of meant to be the cheapest alternative you could buy if you were someone that was previously buying a Core i3 from Intel or one of their Pentium chips. The main thing being, you might not get hyperthreading or SMT, but you did get 4 real cores that you could overclock. That's about as exciting as it gets. That's the whole reason this exists. 4 cores, cheap price, and there's no reason to buy an i3 or a Pentium with 2 cores when AMD's going to give you 4 for the same money. And this wasn't like the FX era where it was questionable whether the cores were real. No, this was just a fully cut down Zen chip running the pure basics they could offer you. And reviewers, well, they were very happy with it, because you've got to remember this was up against 2 core 4-thread solutions from Intel, which in a lot of games of the era did really benefit from their excellent IPC and higher clocks, but at the same time, you did get 4 real cores, which in the world of today, well, we look at 4 cores as being dead, so you can imagine that the 2-core chips, well, they really aren't doing too well. The problem is though, being a Zen 1 based chip, IPC is questionable at best, often somewhere between Sandy Bridge and Ivy Bridge depending on the task at hand, which as we know on this channel, are very, very cheap processors. And of course, there's no XFR2 going on here. XFR2 came out with Zen 2 and allows the chips to boost as high as they need to in applications when they need them. Here, well, there's none of that. It is as basic as you can get for a Zen chip. The only extra performance to be had is to manually overclock it like we've just done, and they do that well. But the problem is, it's not exactly going to be performing its best out of the box. That's up to you to get out of it. And because of this, well, no one really wants them because there's better options with more cores for not much more. So we get the idea. It's as basic as Zen can go, but given that Zen has pretty much turned the tables on the CPU market to the stage where very few people are looking at Intel at the moment, just what was this entry-level processor like? Well, it's based on the Zen 1 architecture, which of course was the very efficient 14nm process, and has 4 cores that come out of the box at 3.1 GHz. Some apparently do support boost up to 3.4 GHz, but it didn't work well on my motherboard. Maybe I'm running too new of a BIOS, but at the same time, yeah, you can overclock to make that up anyway. You get 512 kilobytes of L2 cache, and surprisingly, the full 8 megabytes of L3 cache, which is a staggeringly high amount for an entry-level chip of this era. The TDP is 65 watts, you get all of the modern feature sets available, so virtually everything will launch, and you also have an unlocked multiplier. Zen 1's 14nm process was designed for efficiency, so of course you can boost the clocks up, but a lot of it can depend on the sample you've got. For today's video, I've got mine running at 3.8 GHz, which is very easily achievable unless you've got a chip that's just been completely fried. You can pick them up today for around £5 to $10. They're worthless. Let's be honest, if you go on an eBay auction, if you are the first bid, you are likely going to win it, because nobody is buying these. As ridiculous as this entire concept is, the cheapest Ryzen processor, the fact you can get them this cheap, well, there are some advantages to tuning up this processor, because out of the box, it's not that impressive. It's really going toe-to-toe with a 20p Core i5 that you could just grab from CEX for next to nothing. However, even just increasing the RAM speed up to 3000 MHz increased our score by 100 points, and then with a very simple overclock that took me all of around 30 seconds to be honest, we were now up there into the Haswell range with 3,248 points in 3D mark. Now, I've not got a huge deal of data for their new CPU profile benchmark, but it is a very good test, even if it is one that takes quite a while to run on the processors that I'm usually working with, and as we can see, with the overclock, well, scaling doesn't really change. The processor does scale well with the more cores that are used, but with the faster RAM, I suppose you could say that it does scale ever so slightly better. That's the main takeaway from this graph. Let's be honest, it's 4 cores, it's going to use all of them at virtually all times, and with an overclock and faster memory, it takes advantage of it more. Not exactly surprising. However, if we actually take a look at how it places itself, well, it does pretty much what I've already told you. Out of the box, it performs pretty much bang on par with a Sandy Bridge Core i5. Not exciting, but that is Zen 1 for you. The IPC was not exactly fantastic. However, being able to tune these with faster memory and an easy overclock places it between a stock and then overclocked Core i5 4670K. I mean, it's closer to the stock 4670K, but it gives you an idea of how it places itself. You're essentially competing with a Haswell Core i5, which at the time, you were spending i3 money to do so. So it's not exactly great, especially when you look at the leap to Zen 2. That's a Ryzen 3 3100 just running its out-of-the-box setup on the graph, and, well, it completely destroys this with over 800 points more when no tuning has been done whatsoever. But still, tuning netted us a solid increase in performance that at least means that we should be able to do something with it. Now this video has been a tricky one to sort of plan out, because when I first ordered it, I was thinking, well, did I accidentally just order a box, in which case this video is pointless, but now I've already made it through to this point, it's hard not to take things a bit more seriously, because genuinely, for a $5, we're on a modern platform. Sure, it's not the most competitive processor in the world in the synthetic tests, but hey, we've seen Haswell i5s are still kicking, so it's a bit of a weird one, and I did want to genuinely test this. So what I've done is I've run it through the entire benchmark suite, and I've got all the results there. I've even tried to optimize titles down to run the best they can on it, in case this is something people are genuinely looking at, and then I've got a few legacy tests I wanted to do to show that, you know what, it's not great, but it can still game, and of course I've got your thermals, your power usage, your general usage, and even Linux. Because, to be fair, driver overhead, when you've only got 4 cores, seems to be something that most of the manufacturers, AMD, Intel and Nvidia, have sort of thrown out the window. So when you're using a modern graphics card, well, just using that with an older processor does eat some of your performance, so I want to see if maybe things were a little bit better over on Linux. But still, for £5, it doesn't matter what way you look at this. If you're looking at it as a fun, stupid video, if you're looking at it as a genuinely serious, I want to buy one of these, it's time to find out something. Which is, how does the cheapest Ryzen processor you can buy perform in the benchmarks? Starting off the benchmarks, and we really are throwing it in the deep end here, with GTA 5 Enhanced Edition running with the maximum ray traced preset, because I just wanted to see, can a £5 Ryzen processor manage a game like this at the very highest of settings. Now I've included resolution in here, but honestly I've only ever changed the resolutions around in these benchmarks to prevent a GPU bottleneck, so we are entirely seeing CPU bound performance. And we did see an average of 33 FPS, however 1% lows down to 19 FPS more or less rendered the game completely unplayable, which is understandable. It's a £5 processor and this is it running at the highest settings. Moving it back to just the high presets, and we're able to play GTA 5 Enhanced Edition at 68 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 57 FPS, which overall, that's a rather solid result. It's the same case if we move over onto GTA Online, where we did see a lower average, now down to 53 FPS, with 1% lows down to 41 FPS. GTA Online in the Enhanced Edition is still very well optimized compared to the older Legacy release, but at the same time, you will still see a performance hit in larger lobbies. Not that I want to include too many Legacy titles, but given the popularity of the Legacy release of GTA 5, it is worth including. When we ran the game with the Ultra settings plus AMD CHEAPEST shadows, it goes to show that in these older releases of the game, you can max them out completely, even on this entry-level and now very cheap Ryzen processor, returning 44 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 31 FPS. So, yep, these older titles, you can max them out with no worries, and you'll still be hovering over that 30 FPS mark. It's still quite intensive to put on a little Ryzen processor like this, but it can manage it. When moving back down to just high settings, we did gain a slight boost to our average, now at 51 FPS, with 1% lows also improving up to 40 FPS. So honestly, the most optimal settings here, just run it with high options. If you really were targeting a 60 FPS frame rate and something like GTA 5 on a £5 Ryzen processor, well, dropping the game right back to normal settings resulted in an 88 FPS average, with 1% lows down to 64 FPS. It's worth including the online version, which of course is the Legacy version here, which returned as 58 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 48 FPS. There's a reason processor reviews take so long, because there's so many different variables that you have to iron out to get an accurate reading. So yes, I did do far too much benchmarking here for GTA 5 Legacy, but it seems quite a relevant test. Probably one of the most relevant benchmarks there is for a processor like this is Counter-Strike 2, so how does it run? Well, with competitive settings, which is low everything and dynamic shadows in a 1080p resolution, where we were entirely CPU bound, we returned 163 FPS on average, and 1% lows down to 124 FPS. And this is the exact same if you move it to a stretched 4x3 resolution, because once again, we are entirely CPU bottlenecked here. There was of course one issue, which is, given this is a relatively light benchmark compared to some of the game modes, I wanted to see how it would fare when we went into a casual game, which of course has quite a lot of players and can be quite busy with lots going on. And with these same settings, so the same competitive settings in 1080p, we now returned 92 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 63 FPS. which arguably was quite the drop, but then again, we only have 4 cores, and honestly, I was just happy to see it stay above 60 FPS. Ark Raiders is an exceptionally well optimized title, and we have seen it work okay on some Haswell chips, which is, from the synthetic testing, just about where this Ryzen 3 is placing itself. I started off with high settings and TAAU running in its native resolution, and we returned 41 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 31 FPS, but I thought, you know what, maybe we can target a slightly higher frame rate than this. So I thought, we'll keep the TAAU because you have to have some form of it, unless you run it without any anti-aliasing, but it can look a bit garish then. So I ran it with low settings, and our average did go up to 51 FPS, but our 1% lows suddenly got a lot worse. It's just the way it goes. There wasn't enough load on the graphics card, and although the processor is eking out that higher average, there's just too much for it to actually be able to produce a stutter-free experience. Honestly, the most ridiculous thing is, the best way of playing this game on this processor, at least with the pairing that we've got graphics card-wise, was epic settings and a 30 FPS cap in place, because it ran with an average of a locked 30 FPS and 1% lows down to 27 FPS. It was a lot smoother than running the game uncapped regardless of the settings used, so really, if you're running with a Ryzen 3, probably best to cap the game at 30 FPS and then go with the highest settings your graphics card can manage. I was a bit underwhelmed by this, but at the same time, we've got 4 cores, 4 threads, and it is a new Unreal Engine title. Next up on the other end of the Unreal Engine 5 spectrum is Oblivion Remastered, which was certainly an interesting one. I think architecturally, Zen does still have quite a lot of modern advantages over some of the comparable used Intel chips that will of course be on older sockets. And of course we do have DDR4 memory, which means bandwidth-wise, well, it's going to help out a little bit as well. Because when we started the game with high settings, we returned 51 FPS on average, and I was thinking, this almost seems too good. I've not seen Oblivion Remastered actually run pretty well on a 4-core, 4-thread processor like this. But as you'll notice, those 1% lows are very indicative of a constant stutter. And there was a constant stutter. And lots of you will be thinking, well, with 1% lows down to 29 FPS, just cap it at 30 FPS and that'll resolve the problem. Well, this is the problem. It didn't matter what settings I used. With a 30 FPS cap in place, we just simply don't have enough cores to stop Oblivion Remastered stuttering. I tried absolutely everything. I probably spent about an hour tweaking around, configuring things, and just thinking, we are on the cusp of playability here with Oblivion Remastered on a £5 processor, and I want it to work. But you just can't. It wants cores that aren't there, and we don't even have SMT to actually help out with extra threads. So unfortunately, Oblivion Remastered is on the cusp of playability, but the engine is just not happy about not having any more than 4 threads available. Talking about games that really do like having more than 4 cores available, and we have Cyberpunk 2077. And I started things off, very stupidly, with ultra settings and ray tracing enabled. I don't know why, I just love to see if they can handle it at all, so we returned 28 FPS on average, and 1% lows down to 17 FPS. Then again, who would be pairing a £5 Ryzen processor with a graphics card that can even run these settings? Moving the game back to high settings pretty much doubled our average up to 48 FPS and gave us a much more fluid experience with 1% lows down to 32 FPS. And this was pretty much fine for general gameplay, but when I really wanted to move into our real stress test, which of course is a big battle trying to reduce the frame rate as much as possible, it did tank our FPS now down to 33 FPS with 1% lows of 22 FPS, once again showing that those 4-core, 4-thread processors like this, when they're overclocked, they are going to struggle. It was still playable, it was still very controllable, and it's about what I would expect from a £5 processor like this, but to actually keep the game playable in these situations, we had to use low settings to be able to ensure that big, heavy battles and combat like this would still be playable, with 36 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 27 FPS. Honestly, if you tweak the game around enough and maybe turn down the crowd density and bits and pieces like that, you could probably get a good mixture of settings going on, but it's just a shame that we're on the cusp of high being completely fine until there's just too much going on. This was actually a really simple benchmark to do. BeamNG pretty much ran flawlessly on our little £5 Ryzen chip. We're in the game with high settings, traffic enabled, and in the jungle map, which as we all know at this point, is a bit of a recipe for disaster on lower end hardware. But here, well, it ran absolutely fine with 46 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 35 FPS. Dropping back to the normal region would result in a nearly 60 FPS experience, but honestly, it didn't really improve our 1% lows too much, so you're better off playing the game with the highest settings your graphics card can manage. Really, BeamNG is playable, so the simpler maps will see higher frame rates, no traffic would see a higher frame rate, really just anything that's not involving stressing the processor would result in a higher frame rate. But still, it's good to see BeamNG, even in these intensive scenarios, runs fine on our £5 Ryzen chip. Also probably a quite relevant test, given that lots of people that'll be looking at building an entry-level AM4 system will probably want to play Fortnite on it. And with performance settings and DirectX 12 enabled, we actually returned a remarkably competitive 112 FPS average, with 1% lows down to 76 FPS. Of course, there were the standard issues of waiting pretty much an entire round for the shaders to be done compiling. You only have 4 cores and 4 threads, and it's not very good at doing them in the background when that's all you've got available. Really, for the smoothest experience, I would suggest capping the game at 60 FPS because it does feel a lot smoother like that, but at the same time, when I was just trying to see what the out-and-out best frame rate we could get was, well, it was with these settings and resulted in a over 100 FPS average, which is decently competitive for what is a bargain bin AM4 chip. On the other end of the spectrum, given it's still a very popular title, we have PUBG. In a very similar vein to Fortnite, the first match was a little bit unstable given it's still doing shader compilation in the background, and it still doesn't deal with it well when you've only got 4 cores and 4 threads. From my general testing of PUBG on processors though, this does clear up eventually, and does result in a rather playable experience even on lower end hardware like this where you really wouldn't expect it. Virtually any settings we used though resulted in the same average and 1% lows, with 57 FPS overall and 1% lows down to 41 FPS once the game had actually stabilised and our frame rate had actually got to where it wanted to be. Other than this, it would hover around that 50 to 60 FPS range, but would stutter on occasion and would just be a tad unplayable until it had calmed down. The thing is though, some people often say that DirectX 11.1 is less CPU intensive, and for me, well, it really wasn't. Regardless of the settings we used, we saw an average of 31 FPS and awful 1% lows. Somehow I managed to actually take out a guy like this. My game was like a slideshow, and this was with DirectX 11 and DirectX 11.1. I'm not too sure what's going on here, maybe it's because the graphics card we got it paired with, but at the same time, DirectX 12 worked far better for me, and just had lots less hitching and stuttering going on. Talking about hitching and stuttering though, we have a brand new game out there, that's right, a brand new game on budget builds, so credit to them for releasing it for 20 quid because at least it's affordable. And I have actually been playing through Samson, and if you've not heard of it, the best way of trying to think about it is, what if GTA met Driver, but then it had the jankiness and comicability of Oblivion? That's pretty much it. It isn't fantastically optimized, so when we ran with the performance settings, you have to use an upscaler, so I went with FSR in its native mode because it had less overhead, and in a 1080p resolution we returned 29 FPS on average with 1% lows down to 22 FPS. I did have an external 30 FPS cap in place, which was a necessity to try and keep frame times at least slightly together, and this game, it can look absolutely fantastic at higher settings. But even on RTX graphics cards, I've not seen any that can actually run it at those higher settings. It does seem though that this game is ridiculously processor intensive because, I mean, I don't blame the Ryzen 5 for struggling here because I'm playing on a Zen 3 based chip, and even there I'm having to play it at a locked 30 FPS because for some reason, I don't know whether they're scaling the simulation with the frame rate, but it does seem the higher frame rate you target, the more load is put on your processor by seemingly absurd margins. Anyway, that's enough of my rant and rambling. Samson, we were nearly playable, but it does go to show that the latest and greatest titles don't seem like they want to run well on a little Ryzen 3 chip that you can pick up for a £5. M&B Bannerlord is an excellent test for a processor benchmark suite because we are simulating a giant battle, and simulation benchmarks, well, they're always giving you a good idea of how the processor is going to struggle towards the late game, which is exactly what this is reminiscent of in this benchmark. With the game running with high settings, which of course does scale the battle size to the settings you're running, we returned 88 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 49 FPS. So overall pretty decent, but those 1% lows could be fierce in places, especially when there was lots on screen. To be fair though, a lot of this was resolved by putting a 60 FPS cap in place, which resulted in a lower average of 56 FPS, but a much smoother feeling game with 1% lows pretty much being in and around the exact same mark. So M&B Bannerlord is playable all the way through to the late game, with these larger battles going on. If you really were targeting a smoother experience, I suppose you could always turn the battle size down to medium and keep the settings as high as you wanted them. If there was ever a title that I do remember people complaining about on their little Ryzen 3 chips back in the day, it was Fallout 4, but the anniversary update has certainly helped performance on a lot of newer processors and graphics cards, so just what is the situation like today? Well, the game defaulted to ultra settings, so I thought, you know what, it's an older title, let's see how it's doing now, because this used to be a complete stutterfest back in the day on these lower end Ryzen chips. But this little £5 Ryzen did return us 54 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 40 FPS. Honestly, I'd probably drop it down to high settings just to get those marks closer together, but at the same time, this is smoother than it used to be. So our little £5 Ryzen has actually improved in performance over the years in one of the more intensive areas of Fallout 4, thanks to the anniversary update. But finally, can it run Crysis Remastered? Well, with medium settings and a 60 FPS cap in place, this was the smoothest we could get the game to run. A lot of the higher end options are just too intensive for this little 4-core 4-thread processor to deal with, despite the fact our graphics card wants to be doing a lot more than this. We returned 55 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 44 FPS, and the cap was almost a necessity to try and keep the frame rate where we wanted it to be. Our average would shoot up, but our 1% lows would stay the same without it there in place, which seems to be a little bit of a trend on this Ryzen chip, where it's architecturally capable of so much more, but physically in terms of hardware, it just isn't. So you end up in this weird mismatch where it's almost running perfectly, but just doesn't have enough hardware to keep up. But still, Crysis Remastered, we were able to achieve pretty good looking visuals as long as we had a 60 FPS cap in place, and it played pretty solid as well. So, overall performance of our Ryzen 3 1200, the cheapest Ryzen processor you can buy, and it must be said that in the most recent and up-to-date titles, I wasn't expecting it to do miracles, because I've been testing a lot of Haswell parts, and I remember this is exactly what it was being compared to on launch, and it is struggling. 4 cores and 4 threads, even with an overclock, does mean that higher settings, especially ones with ray tracing that are quite intensive, are just unattainable. But it does mean that a lot of games where the settings do scale with CPU load run fine. I mean, Cyberpunk's absolutely playable with lower settings, Arc Raiders is playable when it's capped, Counter-Strike can deliver you a decently competitive experience as long as you're not playing too many busy game modes, and things like GTA, whether it be the Legacy or the Enhanced version, eventually you will get a frame rate you want. Honestly, the Enhanced version running with high settings was one of the best experiences on the processor. At the same time though, there were problems. Games like Samson, which came out last week or a few days ago now, I'm not quite too sure, that was just never going to happen, at least with the game in its current state. Oblivion Remastered goes on to show the exact problem with some Unreal Engine 5 titles. We were actually close to getting a playable experience, but the game is asking for cores that we don't have. This is a 4-core, 4-thread processor, and it's just asking for things that we don't have. If this had SMT, multi-threading, then it wouldn't be a problem. But we don't have it here. This is the lowest end Ryzen chip, and that lack of SMT is likely the death knell for this processor, unfortunately. Still, you can do a lot of gaming on it, and you can get away with a decent chunk of modern gaming on it, which for a $5 is astonishing. So, it's not great, but it's certainly passable for a $5. I don't think any of us can argue the fact that so much of this was playable, at least after we tweaked it around. You can't really go wrong. I have gone through though and done a couple of additional legacy tests, just games that people often ask to see, which aren't really too relevant to the overall benchmarks, and also just to see how this processor deals with some legacy tasks. So it's not exactly the largest section of the world, but I have gone through, and the same way we did this section last time, it is just going to be a rapid fire, here's the game, here's the results, here's how it ran, spoken by me as quick as possible to get them out of the way. So for those classic titles, think games just before its era, or titles that are indie games that are, still popular today or seeing a resurgence, just how are they performing, and if that's what you're looking to play, how do they run on a £5 Ryzen 3? Now once again, we are going to try and get through these benchmarks as quick as possible, as these are just the legacy and extra benchmarks. So we started with CSGO running with competitive settings, which is low everything and high shadows, and we were running in an offline match with bots, purely because this was the easiest way of me benchmarking the game. We returned 129 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 81 FPS, which overall was a fairly smooth experience. If you did go into an online match, you'd likely see around 30 FPS added to each of these figures, which overall is about what you'd expect from an entry-level Ryzen chip where people were actively playing CSGO on them. It does seem a bit harsh to be going through all of these benchmarks and not actually put it through some rather CPU-intensive side things, but given City Skylines, well, it's a bit of a questionable benchmark that's not really reminiscent of actual performance depending on what you actually test it on. It varies so much, but at the same time, with high settings plus the UI fix, which is an FPS patch mod available on the workshop, which fixes the UI updating 10,000 times a second, oddly enough quite relevant because I feel like I'm talking 10,000 times per word per second, whatever I'm trying to say, but we did return 53 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 36 FPS. At the end of the day, this is pretty good for City Skylines, and this figure was taken from a 3 times acceleration speed, which means the City Skyline shouldn't be a problem whatsoever. Next up we have RimWorld, where it's not really so much about the average FPS or the 1% lows, but rather the overall tick rate, and it must be said that despite lacking in cores, which is something that RimWorld does like after the version 1.6 update, it was still a fairly solid experience, running with the 4 times speed mod, which allows the game to accelerate as quick as it can, hence the detriment to the frame rate with 28 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 21 FPS, we did see the game actually accelerate its speed quite a lot, so RimWorld, not really a problem, and it let us keep up building our little benchmark colony that we've got going on, which seems to grow each time we actually do a benchmark, so RimWorld, not too much of a problem, but smaller colonies will probably be ideal for you. With all of the space things going on in the world right now, KSP has seen a recent resurgence on Steam, and given it is quite a CPU-intensive program, despite the fact it is one in Unity in a similar case to RimWorld, this one is rather more single-threaded than RimWorld because it's not really been updated for years, and I believe the second one has been abandoned. Still, we ran the game with high settings in 1080p, and with a medium-sized spaceship, well, not really medium, this is quite a small spaceship, we returned 88 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 54 FPS. So overall, not too much of a problem, and even when we were hurtling out of control in space, it looked pretty good and ran pretty smooth as well. Finally though, I did have to include the original Crysis. Why? Because it only actually runs on one core and does occasionally touch the second core, so this is quite relevant in terms of actual IPC and our clock speed and our overclock and all the bits we've done to actually try and improve single core performance. As you can see, we ran the game with DirectX 10, but we did have GPU issues, namely the fact that AMD, Nvidia and Intel seem to have not actually bothered to fix their drivers for the current release of Crysis, resulting in stuttering where there doesn't need to be. At the end of the day, we would eventually stabilise with an average of 58 FPS and 1% lows down to 34, but this is not reminiscent of actual gameplay from the processor. This is down to GPU utilization going all over the place because AMD won't fix their bloody drivers. Now, I'm not going to bore everyone by saying that this thing is a workstation beast. It'll do what you need it to do. You can run OBS with it, you can do a little bit of multitasking, you can generally get away with using your computer without fault. It is a very, very speedy processor to just get around your desktop with. No, it's not quite as snappy feeling as an Intel Ring Bus competitor. Think your Core i7-4770, not that's really a competitor, but I suppose on the used market price-wise it could be. Then, yeah, you get a rough idea of what I'm saying. There's also some advantages to these little Ryzen 3s, which is thermal performance was excellent, peak load even with an overclock was under 70 degrees, our gaming average was around 60, general use just south of 40, and idle just north of 30. The reason for this though is also the fact that the Ryzen 3 is incredibly power efficient. Virtually all of the first Ryzen chips were very efficient, and that's one of the reasons why they were such a big seller, is because even with an overclock, this thing was hovering just around 60 watts of usage. Our gaming average was under 60 watts, and if you're just using the desktop, it hovers around 30 watts, and most of those results are taken with an overclock. If you're just running with stock settings,
then it'll use 54 watts as its peak load, because these things are insanely efficient. They're designed to be overclocked, but honestly, they don't really use too much more power by overclocking them. So I suppose that's one thing they do have going for them, and it also makes cooling them very, very easy. But there will be a substantial amount of people saying, okay, so it runs Windows 11 fine, I guarantee you your little £5 Ryzen will be an absolute beast in Linux. And you know what? You're not really wrong, because Linux will be slightly more lightweight, and I suppose that is something that does benefit these older processors. So for general day-to-day usage, I'll tell you already, Linux was snappier. It was slightly smoother than Windows 11, not that there was any problems on Windows 11, but I have of course filmed an entire segment of Linux testing where we use CatchyOS to see if maybe it can save, or at least improve the experience of our £5 Ryzen processor.
Now, I did just want to do a tiny bit of Linux side testing, because of course, if you're someone looking at building an AM4 system like this, as we've seen, performance on Windows for a fiver is passable. So it's good enough to do the job, but is it better here over on Linux? Well, to be fair, running Windows 11 IoT as I was over on the Windows side, it was fine, but here we are running CatchyOS, we are running the latest version with kernel 6.19.1-1. This has got the latest VRAM optimization update. Not going to do much here because we actually have plenty of VRAM for once, but still. I've just plugged it in, booted up to Linux, we're running all the latest drivers, everything's all set up to go. I downloaded a few games overnight, and the first thing that's caught my attention is if we go into GTA 5, let me bring up the settings menu for you. It's defaulted to maximum ray tracing mode. Now I have dropped the resolution down to 720p because otherwise we are in a GPU bottleneck situation. Not entirely, but still getting close to it. So I just want to see what performance was like, so why don't we start some of our little Linux benchmarks with a tiny bit of GTA 5. So we've got it here running with the maximum ray trace mode, and performance here, well, it's not got to be spectacular, does it? It just has to be smoother to be able to beat Windows, because it was a tad stuttery at these settings. And as we can immediately see up there, well, the processor is still the problem, and it is having to deal with a translation layer. It is, I mean, it's not great, let's be honest. This is about as intensive as you can get GTA 5 Enhanced Edition to be, but it is running smoother between 22 to 30 FPS rather than dropping down to the teens and generally becoming a bit of a stuttery, well, mess of a game, to be honest. Already it does appear that there are some advantages to Linux, maybe not in terms of the overall maximum frame rate, but definitely in terms of the smoothness of the frame rate. I wonder if we drop things down to high real quick, what that'll do there. So if we just drop the game to the high preset, oh yeah, it's running fine. 60 FPS, sort of bouncing between 50 to 60 FPS at the moment, which is about where it should be. Honestly, very comparable performance to Windows, given it's having to deal with a translation layer. I'd imagine that there are less driver overheads over here on the Linux side from the Navi drivers that exist over on Linux. I mean, to be fair, we are seeing a higher frame rate here when not much is going on, so I am going to say lower driver overheads are helping. But as a start to Linux performance, for a little £5 processor, it was fine over on Windows. You're not exactly going to be seeing excessive gains here on Linux, but at the same time, lower average, but probably a smoother feeling experience. So why don't we move on to something else real quick, just to see if there's any difference there. So we've got BeamNG here, we are still running the latest version. This is the native Linux version, I believe, so there's no Proton going on here. I'm running with the exact same high settings, we got the traffic enabled, and to be fair, it is actually running at a higher average and a smoother frame rate at the exact same settings. I don't think there's a great deal of difference between them, but it does seem to be ever so slightly better. I'm not really arguing here. I think over on Windows, off the top of my head, we were seeing about 40-ish FPS. In the exact same situation, we're now seeing around 52 FPS. Dare I say that frame times for once do seem to be worse here on Linux, but at the same time, I'm going to say there's very little between them. I am logging them at the moment, so I will throw up the correct figures down in the bottom left. and then of course you can make your own mind up what's better or worse. Given there isn't a translation layer going on, I don't think there is, it should be ever so slightly better here. So it does appear that for BeamNG is definitely a solution for your little £5 Ryzen. There are a few graphical glitches going on now, but that's nothing to do with the processor. The processor is dealing with this fine. It's got the exact same amount of workload going on with the traffic and everything like that. I mean, we'll try and crash into something and see if it slows down a great deal. Nope, it's absolutely fine. I mean, we lost about 5 to 10 FPS there, but it all seems okay. So I'm happy with that. BeamNG, even better here on Linux. Now this one is going to be an interesting one with Samson, because as we saw, we just about managed to get about 30-ish FPS out of it. I've still got a 30 FPS cap in place. I mean, the real answer will be when we get outdoors. I've not actually seen this game running on Linux yet, so I don't know how much support it has here. So if we just pop on outside, we'll see how it's doing. I mean, the graphics card is seeing more utilization here, which could be a good thing. I mean, we're running the exact same settings. Okay, we're getting about 29, 27 FPS. No, I don't think Linux is enough to make Samson playable. It's definitely, if you're in a pinch and this was a game you really wanted to play, you could do it. It is definitely around a playable level depending on your tolerance to fluctuating frame rates. But the optimizations in this game, at least on the processor side of things, they're so questionable. And I'd imagine with the overhead going on for Proton as well, I mean, yes, we do probably have lower driver overhead overall, but this isn't a native port like BeamNG is, so it's still having to deal with a translation layer on just 4 cores when it was already struggling on its native platform. Okay, yeah, it's don't get me wrong, yeah, it's not great. I was just seeing if maybe it felt a little bit smoother, but no, we are seeing anywhere from sort of 24-ish FPS average. I will once again throw up the exact figures down in the bottom left that we actually do get. It's not great. Samson really is the epitome of, they definitely didn't try this on a 4-core processor, because, I mean, aiming for 30 FPS on 4 cores, is that unheard of? I mean, in a game like this, I don't really think so, because yes, they'll say there's lots of simulations going on. It's no GTA 5. Do you know what I mean? I get it's a little team, and I've been enjoying playing it. I mean, it's very buggy. Like, half the appeal is, it feels like I'm playing a combination of Oblivion meets Grand Theft Auto a little bit at times, purely from the jank. But at the same time, you know what? I wasn't expecting it to suddenly be playable, but it's doing better than I thought it would be. It's hovering between 25 to 30 FPS most of the time. I'd say the frame times probably do feel a little bit smoother. There's less hitching and stuttering, but at the same time, it's still not a high enough average that I'd say this is a great experience. So Samson, unfortunately, this isn't it. Now, Counter-Strike we've just got here as a bit of a legacy test, to be honest, because, I mean, we've tested a pretty good range of games here on Linux. We've tested popular indie titles, popular titles with GTA 5, brand new titles, so why don't we try something a bit more legacy, because Counter-Strike should work excellent, especially CSGO. I am downloading CS2 as well, because that should also work excellent here. CSGO just seemed a bit easier given how popular it is on Steam at the moment, and it's already looking to be excellent. We're getting 200 FPS. We are running with the exact same settings, but this is running flawlessly. Keep in mind, we are playing offline with bots just for the sake of benchmarking today, but no, this is perfect. We're getting around lows of about 120 FPS. No, this is absolutely fine performance, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, I'll do another round and just see what it plays like. I can't see there being all too many problems with this. So if you are playing older titles, given what I was saying earlier about driver overhead, given it will be lower on Linux, there's a chance that a lot of these sort of early 2010s titles that will run absolutely fine over on Windows may actually just run straight up better over on Linux, because we're seeing anywhere from sort of 120 to 220 FPS, when not much is happening about the 200 FPS mark, which is, well, excellent, to be honest. I mean, I'm not exactly doing the most competitive Counter-Strike playing in the world at the moment. You know, it's good enough to say, hey, at least it's working. So, there we go, Linux side performance, and it seems to be pretty much perfect on our little 4-core Ryzen. I mean, older titles perform better, indie titles that have Linux ports will perform better. Games like GTA 5, well, they'll seem to run about the same, maybe slightly smoother frame times with a lower average, but it's probably going to depend on the title. And then, of course, your brand new titles out there well, they're still going to have the same problems they have over on Windows, because at the end of the day, it is just 4 cores, and even when it's running at 3.8 gigahertz, it's not going to be enough to save things. But for a little £5 Ryzen chip, it does work really well here on Linux. So I did just want to include a Linux segment because, one, it is relevant information, and two, lots of people are running Linux these days, so they do want to know how it performs.
So there we have it, the cheapest Ryzen processor you can buy pretty much anywhere in the world. I am seeing these go for cheap on AliExpress, I'm seeing them go cheap on Marketplace, I'm seeing them cheap on, not really Amazon because no one buys anything off Amazon. I'm seeing them cheap on CEX and eBay. They are cheap no matter where you look. I think the buy it now price for this on CEX is like £8 or £10. It's something ridiculously cheap, and then you get a 5-year warranty. And chances are someone's flogged it in to return it in the box. So you may get lucky like me and order one with a 5-year warranty and it will come with the box as well. So it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's in a tricky spot, because objectively, I can tell you that for similar money, you could buy an Intel Haswell Xeon, like we've done on this channel, and you will get more stable performance, that's going to be more reliable, and play some of those harder to run games, even including Oblivion. And you'll be able to do it okay there. The thing is, though, that you've got no upgrade path from there. All of the cheap budget competitors to this on 1150 and even to some extent the Skylake sockets, unless you're modifying it, are stuck with 4 cores and 8 threads maximum. Whereas here, well, you can go up to an X3D chip, which is something modern, competitive, and still highly sought after today. So in many ways, I think if you're someone that's just looking to do a quick budget build to play games and you're not focused on upgradability, it's just to build it, play it, done with it, then probably go for something Sandy Bridge to Haswell and just do whatever's cheap and available to you. But if you are looking at building a cheap computer that you can actually use for a few years and upgrade from there, then maybe this Ryzen chip isn't a bad place to start. Now, yes, if you come across a 6-core or an 8-core for similar money, especially if you come across something that's Zen 2, because XFR2 is a game changer on AM4. Just being able to have a single core boost as high as it needs to in the applications that need it, it just changes the playing field. It is brilliant technology that Zen 1 just doesn't have. So it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because if you can get something Zen 2, I would say do that. If you can't, well, this isn't a terrible place to start, even if it's just to test your setup. So I've had a really enjoyable time testing this. I've been a bit nostalgic because I forget how old these processors are now, and I got one when they first came out. But anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's been a lot of work, but also a lot of fun. So thank you all very much. I hope you've enjoyed, and good night.